There's more than one reason why several years ago the National Geographic magazine designated the Jocassee Gorges region as one of the 50 last great places on earth to visit. I think at the top of that list of reasons is a phenomenon called the blue wall. And what it is a pretty unique geological phenomenon here in the southern Appalachian Mountains. There are places around Pickens and Easley where you can look back and literally see the blue wall. It's a drop in elevation, dramatic drop in elevation, 2,000 feet, all along, basically along Highway 11, and it provides tremendous relief. Now, you put that phenomenon together with the highest rainfall in South Carolina historically has been right in this area, right in Rocky Bottom, around 88 inches a year, you get erosion. And over 400 million years, you get these huge gorges. And that's really why Jocassee Gorges is called Jocassee Gorges, is because we have four major river gorges, Whitewater, Thompson, Horsepasture, and Toxaway rivers, which are extremely botanically rich areas. There are plants that grow in the spray zone of some of these waterfalls in these four major gorges that don't occur anywhere else in the world. It is a refugium, or a refuge, a microclimate environment that replicates their original environment, and it's the last habitat for that plant on Earth. And you know, we've got Oconee bells. I know a lot of people talk about Oconee bells. A lot of people know the story that it was first discovered by a French botanist in 1788, Andre Michaud. But for me, one of the most amazing aspects of Oconee bells is I wrote an article for South Carolina Wildlife magazine on Andre Michaud's discovery and the fact that nobody could find it again for 100 years, and that's all interesting and a great story. But I wrote a sidebar called "Why Did the Oconee Bells Never Cross the Road?" And it's something I encountered several years ago in my wanderings, not very far from here, out of the East Otoe Valley. There's a road that goes to Cane Creek, a pretty major stream through there. The banks of Cane Creek are just coated in Oconee bells. They grow from the stream edge to maybe 30 yards away, and they're colonial, so it just covers the area. Now, here's why they never cross the road. There is a logging road there. It's about 30 feet wide. You can cross that logging road, and there's not a single Oconee bell on the other side of the plant. There are thousands of them right up the edge of the logging road on the right side of the road. On the left side of the road, nothing. And here's the kicker. You could set your compass on east at that point and walk all the way to Myrtle Beach, and you won't find another Oconee bell. And so I wrote the sidebar, and the editor says, "This is great. This is a great story, but you can't leave it like that. Why did the Oconee bells never cross the road if you don't tell why they didn't cross the road?" So I called Patrick McMillan, who many folks know because he has his show Expeditions with Patrick McMillan, and he was in Peru or somewhere like that. And so I called my friend Dan Patillo, who is the retired botanist at Western North Carolina, and Dan says, "Let me get back to you on that." And in a couple of days he calls back and he says, "Here's the only thing I can come up with. Because we know that the only habitat for Oconee bells in the world is the Jocassee watershed. In other words, you can draw a ring on a topo map around Lake Jocassee where the water that flows into Lake Jocassee, that's the watershed, and that's the only place it grows." He said, every plant has a specific seed disperser. Sometimes it's an insect, sometimes it's a mechanism like bear lice that stick to your pants, and you carry them a half mile and then they get brushed off, and you have unwillingly helped transport that seed. He said, apparently sometime in prehistory, because we know this is what's called a tertiary plant. It's been here for really since the Pliocene, about 400 million years, and so at some time in prehistory it lost its seed disperser, and so now we have a plant that is the darling of the wildflower world, largely because it's so rare and unique and has this interesting story with it, that is locked in space and time. It cannot escape its habitat. It can't cross the ridge, which would require a seed disperser, either some physical mechanism like, there are helicopter seeds on maple trees, or an ant will disperse the seeds of bloodroot, for example. And so here it is. And so It has very low genetic diversity, and with climate change, I'm real concerned that any animal or plant that has low genetic diversity and very narrowly defined habitat requirements does not have a very happy future with climate change. So it does not have a lot of ability to adapt. So thankfully, I've been working with Natureland Trust and Upstate Forever. They are now trying to acquire the remaining Oconee bell populations that are on private property. Fortunately, most of the Oconee bell habitat is either in the Jocassee Gorges or in the muster ground area owned by Duke Power. Basically, it's all on public land and protected. There are two major streams that still have populations of Oconee bells south of Lake Jocassee, and they are acquiring either through outright acquisition or through conservation easement these remaining habitats, because I've made the case to them that this is an imperiled plant. It has very little adaptability in its genetic reservoir and its pool. And with climate change, it may well be these southernmost plants that have a genetic profile that will be the salvation of the species in the future. So one way or the other, thank goodness somebody's working on that problem. So we have tremendous biological diversity, and I'll just give an example. The Nine Times Preserve was acquired several years ago. It's south of Highway 11, and the Nature Conservancy acquired it because of these southern-facing rock outcrops, which are a microhabitat and have their own plant communities, which are exceedingly rare. These plants, for the most part, don't occur anywhere else except around southern-facing rock outcroppings. But it also, on the northern end of the property, has Appalachian Cove habitats, which is a lot of, the rich, beautiful wildflowers that we all love. Well, there's lots of cove species in there. And what's interesting is you can find on one end of the property species that occur in the maritime provinces of Canada, and walk to the other end of the property. It's only a 500-acre tract, and there are species that occur along the coast of South Carolina, a lot of the orchids and things like that. So the southern end of the Blue Ridge, which is the blue wall, is the southern limit for a lot of northern species and the northern limit for a lot of southern species. And so we get this huge area of just really incredible diversity. That is also one of the reasons why National Geographic named this area one of the 50 last great places on Earth to visit. So we've got tremendous botanical diversity, but also we really have a rich and varied Native American history. It's only been in the last year or so, as a part of, I was involved in writing the text for a historical marker for the East Oconee Valley, and I wanted to document the Native American heritage of the East Oconee Valley, which is just a few miles from where we're standing. And so I called an archaeologist friend of mine, Tommy Charles, and I asked him what was the oldest Native American artifact that he had found or had seen in the East Oconee Valley. And he said, Clovis. Clovis is stunning. That's 14,000 years ago. These are the first humans thought to inhabit North America, and their artifacts are found right here in the East Oconee Valley. So the Native American heritage of this area literally dates back 14,000 years, right up through the Cherokees in the modern era, which would have been about 400 or 500 years ago when they occupied, actually one of their principal towns was right there in East Oconee Valley. The Cherokee heritage of this area, and specifically Sassafras Mountain, is the name derives from the Cherokees, who had occupied a hamlet or a small village, probably just clan-based. It wasn't a major town, but it was right here at the base of Sassafras in an area called Sassafras Gap, right on the state line between North and South Carolina. And in 1839, when the new federal government rounded up all the Cherokees and shipped them off to Oklahoma, obviously they had to abandon their village. Well, all of their cornfields very quickly, in a matter of a few years, grew up in sassafras saplings. Sassafras is a native species, but it's also invasive. It will take over a field if you don't burn the field every year. And so the place came to be known as Sassafras Fields, and later on the entire mountain came to be known as Sassafras. So that's how sassafras got its name. The Native American heritage of this area also is evidenced by, I mentioned a little earlier Tommy Charles, an archaeologist friend of mine, and how I got to know him was he called me back in 1999, which seems like a lifetime ago now, and said he was an archaeologist from the South Carolina Institute of Archaeology and Anthropology. And I said, well, that's fine. How can I help you? And he said, well, he said, I know this is going to sound odd, but he said, I'm looking for petroglyphs, Indian rock carvings in South Carolina. He said they're finding them in Tennessee, Virginia, northwestern Georgia, and western North Carolina, and they ought to be in South Carolina. And I said, whoa, that's kind of interesting. I thought all the petroglyphs were out in Nevada, New Mexico, Arizona, and the American Southwest. And he said, well, I did too until recently. And I said, well, let me ask you something. I said, how many of these petroglyphs have you actually seen in South Carolina? And because he had already told me he'd been an archaeologist for 20-something years, he said 6. And he said, there is a meticulously carved beetle on a boulder right down off of Assembly Street in Columbia, not far from his office. I said, really? And he said, yeah, and there's a turtle carved on a rock on the Chattooga River. And so now he's got my interest. And I said, okay, what can I do for him? He said, well, where they're finding them in these other states is on rock outcroppings, usually high elevation rock outcroppings with a view. He said, do you know of anything like that? And of course, I live on Highway 11 right at Table Rock State Park. And I said, well, here's the deal. I said, I live at the biggest granitic dome in South Carolina, Table Rock. I said, you come on up to the house and we'll go up there, and if there's anything up there, we'll find it. Now, what I'm going to tell you now is going to sound like a made-up story. It actually happened this way. So he drives up from Columbia, gets up here pretty early. We leave out from my house. We come up on Botanical, and we found 600 the first day. 600 on one outcropping. They were like lines of text on a page. It's still an incredible phenomenon. Now, fast forward to now 2020, but by 2019, we had found, along with quite a number of other folks who got caught up in their circle. They're all circle-themed petroglyphs. And looking for these things, we now have nearly 3,000 of these circle petroglyphs on 15 different sites in both Carolinas, all the way up to Pisgah National Forest. And just on the Pinnacle Mountain Table Rock Complex, we have 9 sites with, I would guess, on the range of 1,200 to 1,400 somewhere just on Table Rock and Pinnacle. It is an amazing phenomenon, and a good friend of mine, Gene Johnston, had hired a fellow to take some aerial photographs of these sites and then some close-up photos, and has literally sent them to archaeologists all over the world, as far away as Australia. And honestly, people are just blown away with this phenomenon, because it occurred to me after several years that one of the things that makes this circle petroglyph phenomenon so amazing is they're all above 2,000 feet in elevation. All of the sites are homogeneous. They're all circles, or what I call circuloids, which means they're circle-themed petroglyphs. They're not, some of them are perfect circles with a pedestal in the middle, like you cut a donut out of the rock. Or, for example, we have found 2 what we call daisy chains, where there are 14 circles linked together. I remember I told Tommy today we found those. I said, Tommy, you might make a mistake carving in the rock one time and carve 2 circles close together that they ended up being overlapped, but you wouldn't make that same mistake 14 times, so it must have some other significance. But they're all basically circle-themed petroglyphs. They cover the range from being almost triangular to oval. There are quite a number of what we call doublets, which looks like a figure 8, 2 circles kind of put it up against each other like that. Lord knows we don't know what it means. And the first 2 questions we get is who did this and what does it mean? And we don't know the answer to either question. It apparently was not the Cherokees. The Cherokees are thought to have been here for about 1,000 years. And James Mooney, who was an ethnologist with the Smithsonian Institute in 1894, lived among the Cherokees in western North Carolina, and wrote this voluminous Myths of the Cherokees, which is kind of the classic work for studying the Cherokee history. And he asked the Cherokees about petroglyphs, not here because these weren't known at that time, but Track Rock Gap in Blairsville, Georgia. There are a couple of petroglyph sites around. And they started telling him this myth about, these are tracks of the animals when the earth was young and the rocks were clay. And so I wrote in my article in the Wildlife magazine that tells me two things. They didn't do it, but more importantly, they didn't even have an oral tradition who did it. And oral traditions sometimes survive generations and hundreds of years. So I'm thinking it's probably they're prehistoric. And another archaeologist friend of mine, Janny Laubser, in Atlanta, is considered one of the Southeast experts in rock art, or rock art includes both the carvings, petroglyphs, and pictographs, and we have 6 or 7 of those now in the upcountry of South Carolina. And Janny Laubser thinks they're probably in the range of 1,500 to 2,500 years ago. I don't think you would get an archaeologist to speculate this or go on record, but I am now convinced that it must be the Hopewell culture that is known to have migrated through this area from about 1,500 to 2,500 years ago. These are the mound builders of southern Indiana, Ohio Valley, who migrated down through this area. There was a time when there were over 300 documented mounds, Indian mounds, in South Carolina. Most of them have been, bulldozed down or turned into agricultural fields, but there are some, Santee Mound, for example, down on Lake Marion is probably one of the best preserved mounds of the Santee Indians left. So well worth a visit too, by the way. It's a national monument, easy access and interpretive panels around there. So we have incredible biological diversity. We have a rich and varied Native American history. No wonder we've been named as one of the 50 last great places on earth to visit. Visitors to this area are sometimes overwhelmed by the enormous number of places to visit and what's to be seen there and how to get there. For example, jumping off rock is something that everybody in this region ought to see at least one thing. It's a prominent rock outcropping in the heart of the Jocassee Gorges property, and it's not a tremendous elevation, 2,800 feet, something like that. But when you're standing on jumping off rock, Lake Jocassee with its just beautiful crystal blue waters is right down at your feet. You can see as far as Currahee Mountain in Georgia off to the due south. You can see Whiteside Mountain and all of this tremendous vista. And the important thing about that vista is that is becoming a rare thing, to be able to see 40 and 50 miles in all directions without houses hanging off the ridges and power lines and ski slopes and all this kind of stuff. The heavy hand of man is barely visible because the view you're looking at is either Jocassee Gorges, the state-owned property, Devil's Fork State Park, or the Andrew Pickens unit of the U.S. Forest Service, or Duke Power still has about 10,000 acres immediately across from Jumping Off Rock in a part of their Mustergan property, which is under conservation easement. So basically it's all in protected status, and that is becoming a very rare thing. So how do you get to Jumping Off Rock? Well, that's a great thing to know, except folks know how to get there. It's pretty easy, actually. One of the main intersections in this area in terms of accessing some of these natural and cultural sites is the intersection of Highway 11, the Cherokee Foothill Scenic Highway, and US 178, coming out of Pickens and going toward Rosman. That four-way intersection there is kind of the epicenter of the whole area. If you take 178 toward Rosman, about 8 miles, you will encounter, you'll cross the Big East Toy River and immediately turn left on a gravel road. That is the road, the horse pasture road that runs through the 20 miles through the entire length of the Jocassee Gorges property, at least on that side of 178. And at about 10 miles, there's no signage, but if you stay on that road, don't make any turns, you will end up at the parking lot for Jumping Off Rock, and it's maybe 100 yards from where you park. So this is a great time of the year, either winter when the humidity is low, During the fall foliage, it is absolutely spectacular. So you have sites like that. Table Rock itself, of course, is accessed through Table Rock State Park. They have a network of hiking trails for the more adventurous up to the top of Table Rock. If you're physically fit and capable of doing it, I highly recommend it. The view is compelling, looking back toward the city of Greenville and Berea and Easley, all that. You might see some circle petroglyphs up there. There's a ton of them on 5 different sites. And they have smaller trails like the Carrick Creek Loop Trail. We have the Foothills Trail that runs all the way from, really, it starts on Pinnacle Mountain in Table Rock State Park at the extreme western end. It's connected to their trail system at Table Rock State Park. That's where that trail begins and goes 72 miles all the way to Oconee State Park. So it's about a 4-day trip for most people. You can cut it up into day hikes because there are so many roads that cross that area that you can, have somebody drop you off and somebody pick you up and make it into, pretty easy day trips. As a matter of fact, the Foothills Trail comes right by here, right by the observation tower at Sassafras. So that's a good place to park. You can have somebody drop you off, for example, at Table Rock State Park, and then maybe another vehicle here, or at an assigned time have somebody pick you up here. So we got tons of established hiking trails. One of our newest trails is right down here on the Big East Oconee River. It's called Beach Bottom Falls. It was just put in last year and officially opened, I think, last spring. The parking lot for that is actually on the road up to the Sassafras Observation Tower, which again you access off of that 4-way intersection between the Cherokee Foothills Scenic Highways and Highway 178. Just continue on like I described before, and you turn right on F. Van Clayton Road. And when you get through Chimney Top Gap, which is a series of S turns, and immediately when you go over the gap, there's a parking lot on the left, and now a relatively new sign that'll lead you to Beach Bottom Falls. It's really a dramatic set of falls and a really nice, in some cases, they've actually got a boardwalk that you walk on because of the steepness of the slope. So no shortage of places to hike. Of course, you got all the recreational amenities that go with the lakes, Kiwi and Jocassee. There are privately operated tours there, Jocassee Outdoors, and then you can just take a waterfall tour if you didn't do anything but go see waterfalls. For example, one of the most, I think, aesthetically appealing, one of the prettiest waterfalls and most accessible goes by a couple names, but I think most people call it Twin Falls, but it's also known as Reedy Cove Falls because it's Reedy Cove Creek that falls over it, or East Oconee Falls. Again, from that 4-way intersection of 178 Highway 11, you just head up like you were going to Rosman, take the second paved road to the left. And don't you love people who give you directions for where things used to be? You turn left on Cleo Chapman, where Scatterbrain's beer joint used to be. It burned down a couple years ago, but the footprint is still there. Turn left on Cleo Chapman Road, get down across the Big East Oconee River, and about 100 yards turn right, and go up to the end of the valley and turn on Waterfall Road. There's a real nice parking lot there. There is an observation tower. It's probably one of the most photographed waterfalls in South Carolina. The South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, the Wildlife Department to most people, has developed a driving tour of the Jocassee Gorges, which for folks, who are mobility impaired or just not that adventurous but wants to get a sense for what's up here in the mountains of South Carolina. And you can request this map. It's a beautiful fold-out map that you can see, that your wife or your husband or whoever's doing the driving, the other one can sit with the map, and you basically come up 178, go to Highway 64, take it over to Botanical Road in Whitewater Community off of 64, and then back down. Really stunning view of Lake Jocassee from an overlook up there. You'll get a pretty good flavor of why this is such a special place from having taken that driving tour. Of course, one of the greatest attractions for the Jocassee Gorges region is the wildflowers. As I talked about a little bit earlier, It's an extremely botanically rich area. We have lots of microclimates or habitats where certain plant communities occur. In some cases, don't occur anywhere else. But in terms of times to come and look at wildflowers, I tell folks that the peak of the wildflower season, and if you're particularly interested in Oconee bells, over the last 30 years I've come up with this formula that if you go sometime to where Oconee bells grow, say the Devil's Fork State Park, which has a specific Oconee bell trail, it's a loop trail about half a mile, just about anybody who's ambulatory can walk that trail, you're going to see lots and lots of Oconee bells. If you go to where Oconee bells grow between the second week in March and the second week in April, it might not be the peak when you go, but there will be some Oconee bells there for you to see. And that's really kind of the peak of the early spring or spring ephemerals, those plants that get up early, like some of them start flowering, like hepatica as early as late February and early March. See, these are interior forest species that grow in what will eventually become a closed canopy forest for most of the year, the growing season, and they get very little sunlight. So they got to get up early, get their business done, produce their flowers, get them pollinated, make seeds, and then they'll kind of die back in the rest of the year. Then we have lots of roadside wildflowers that are more late summer, early fall wildflower. But my recommendation, if you just want to see abundance and natural beauty, you need to be up in this area sometime in late March through about late April. There are still some wildflowers, interior species, flowering in early May, but it really has started to wane by then. So keep that period in mind. And most of the hiking trails, I didn't mention that we also have 140 miles of logging roads that are accessible by foot or mountain bike that you can hike, and you're apt to see just about any of these early spring wildflowers. And if you happen to be in the habitat where they grow, that's the season they're going to be flowering.